reaching out and talking to so many people who share that passion for finding growth, supporting growth, and really driving that through. But I think we've seen quite a big spectrum, Nick, haven't we, of kind of understanding of data, how it's being used, and really how we can get to the nub of those firms that we want to get to. So, you know, we know we've got something that's very special. We've got huge amounts of insights, but I think getting that body of people to really get on board with that and come forward has been a fascinating experience and I think really exciting. But yeah, challenging, definitely intellectually.
Intellectually challenging. But also, I mean, in fact,
it's a grey hair. So.
It's a grey hair. The grey matter. I was reflecting with Meg, our technical sales consultant, who's been doing a lot of the legwork with me, with us, about we had a demo that seemed to go very well. They were very interested and very keen. And then they just kind of at the end got really deflated. We were like, here are 210 businesses with one red flag and a growth score. And once you've got that list, and they just sort of, their shoulder just went down on the Zoom. And they were like, I just don't know what we would do for them. And I was a bit like, and Meg, straight afterwards, we kind of regrouped and were like, we worked for a body called the insert place name growth board. The growth board. The fact they didn't have an offer. I mean, it does feel like the sector has expanded and contracted a lot with COVID and other things, but the troops are pretty demoralised out there, I think.
I mean, you know, I was taking a very positive view, but you know, starting from a very realistic position, I think the whole network out there has been through a huge amount of change, especially over the last 12 months. You know, that transition from EU funds to new funds. There's a gap at the minute, and so there's certainly a very challenging space out there for anybody operating in this sector. I think though that, and you know, I'm going to go positive very soon, so that's my nature, but yeah, I think there are so many new tools out there for people, so many new bits of data that actually, okay, there's been a lot of change, but you can start from a base now with tools that you could only dream of having 10 years ago. So actually the opportunities are there. I think we've just got to take that positive view of, right, we've now got the tools that enable you to find those companies with the greatest growth potential. We've got a huge amount of learning and insight that's been gathered over the last 10, 20 years about how to work with those firms and how to take them through that growth journey. And we've got the tools to enable us to do it. And I think with the new sets of digital tools that we've got, there's fantastic opportunities to do that. I think one of the really interesting things is that when you look at that economic climate, there's a lot of negativity and worry and challenge out there, but there's still a lot of growth taking place. It's hidden. That's the challenge, is that if you look at the big overall stats, it's very easy to get into a position of, oh, we're really struggling to find that growth. Where is it? But there is always growth taking place. The challenge has always been getting to the nub of it and finding it. And, you know, I was reflecting back 10 years ago when I set up First Growth Hub. At that time, we did find those growth businesses, but we had to put a huge amount of work into developing referral networks. You know, we had to engage with so many different businesses to filter down to find those ones that had real potential. And even then, it was a partial kind of game. So the amount of time and effort you've got to put in to do that then, you know, if I'd had a tool like a wonderful growth to do that now, but back then, would have just got there a lot quicker and a lot better. So I think being able to identify firms with growth potential is really, really key. And once you've got to them, that's where you can have the kind of really biggest impact on them when you get there. So
you can have a generalized service offer and sort of, you know, put your flag up and say, or put your sign up and say, you know, here we are, we want to help. Or through programs and through targeting and segmenting, you can be much more proactive. And rather than a sort of generic, God forbid, it's much more specific and bespoke.
And I think building that on that analogy and taking that back into kind of what we can do for businesses, it's, you know, there are those scale ups and there's definitely technically a whole raft of kind of institutional things that need to change to really enable them to really excel. And a lot of that's happening, and that's getting a lot of focus at the minute, and has been over the last sort of few years, and that's great that that's there. But then there's a huge bunch of other firms sitting underneath that that have still got growth potential, perhaps not at that scale, but have got long-term growth potential, and we're seeing that in the data. I think it's really easy to miss that group. I think there's a lot of focus around kind of cost of doing business, focusing on those really kind of hard to reach, the businesses struggling. And again, I understand why that is, but it's easy to miss this bit. That's where your big drive of growth is going to come from. They're the businesses that are going to change your local economy. They're the people that are going to give you those long-term jobs, those companies that can scale deep and really get embedded in your place. And I think that's the interesting kind of data to look at. But I think what we can start to see now is where they're within that group, where there's some interesting segments. Now, I'm not going to steal your thunder, but those that have got potential but have got some financial risk in there, they're just a fascinating group to look at. So I've got to let you say a bit more about that. But when I see that group, I think they're the first people that I want to get on the phone to with that whole mix of services that we've got at the growth company, because they've got the potential, they can be a big part of our local economy, but they've got some risks there, and we know what those risks are. And I think that's a fascinating kind of segment.
I think part of the reason that we're a bit stuck to understand that we have essentially been stuck in a low growth pattern since the 9th month of 2004, Richard James' brilliant blog this week, is the kind of cognitive dissonance. It's the same as if you ask somebody in the abstract, how is the health service doing? They're always like, oh, it's awful. But then the story is, oh, when I went in, they saved me, and I had my baby that way, and I had a car. Your individual experience is brilliant, but somehow you feel that the system is under impossible pressure. With the economy, it's somewhat different. People know and feel instinctively that their places don't feel richer or better or smarter, or the visible physical streetscape doesn't feel kind of buzzy, or so they feel like it's bad where they are, but they believe it's good somewhere else. And I guess this is back to a realistic economic narrative, is because we are all kind of conditioned to believe that growth is elsewhere, and what we're going through is our experience. Somehow it doesn't. There's a more cognitive dissonance, I think, between kind of your lived experience of the economy, your closed high street, your restaurant closing because they can't get staff, all those kinds of things, and then the big man smiling on the news saying, well, it's national average, national aggregate demand, technical recession avoided. And so the K shape helps you to get through that, which is your average is in the middle. So if you do it on weekly median earnings, £640 is weekly median earnings everywhere. I did this for looking into the weekly median earnings in the parliamentary constituency by-elections that we've just had. 640 quid is there, and that is average weekly gross earnings, and not taking into account housing. So there's a big thing there. But the top of the K, and this is madness, parliamentary constituency with the highest median weekly income is now Poplar and Limehouse, because Canary Wharf, more people live there that are earning there, and that is 1,100 and something. Bottom, Foyle in Northern Ireland, £403. And these people, and all the way down to these people, and these people are having a very different time. And I guess this has always been the case, right? It's just that at the moment we're lacking mechanisms for the K to close. The K is widening all the time, and that's true if you look at growing businesses. Yes, we've got in our growth plan a high number of growing businesses at the same time as we've got the most insolvencies there have ever been. There will be the most businesses going insolvent this year that have ever gone insolvent, and it's this K which I think serves to kind of obscure some of the things that we instinctively know about the economy. And if, of course, so on that example I've just used, if the average is 640, it's just so far from the experience of the people on the 403, right? Because, and again, very neatly, complete accident. That's 3 times that, right? That is, you know, and what's so fun is because I was trying to make the case that the connections in the data would link to the outcomes in elections. And of course, Poplar and Limehouse, it's a Labour seat, always has been, and will always be, because the resident population around Canary Wharf is as mixed as it is, and that East London kind of. So that became very interesting because the elections, by-elections that we had, Uxbridge, 12th or 13th on the list, up there £1,000 a week. Selby, 604, so there, and the Somerton and, it's not Somerton and Anstey, was it? Somerton and Frome, thank you, Tris, was more or less, so Selby was below, Somerton and Frome was bang on, Lib Dems, and then the peripheral London seat was, you know, right up here. And again, this is obviously a little bit of politics in a webinar, but that is creating a narrative which works for all 3 places is virtually impossible. And we're seeing sort of the narrative that's sort of taken hold is that you have to disbelieve what you've got in your own household, which is less money, because there's something happening somewhere else. And that doesn't feel very consistent to me, very coherent to me. And a more data-led approach leads you to think these things through, I think. So the first point is businesses don't know how they look to lenders ever. Like when you start to, so you know, we did a pitch to a consultancy, and we were like, "Do you think that you're a growth business?" And they were like, "Well, I said, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think so." And they had an 87 growth score, so they were in anyone's metric, whether they'd intended to or not. They'd been doing all the things to expand and all the rest of it. Obviously, consultants and economic development is a rising market. But there's that first point, which is, do you understand how you would look to a lender and why lending money to your business would be more expensive? Do you understand that? Because we can show you that these are the metrics that a lender would use, and they wouldn't want to fund your growth. That's particularly important in the current climate, because some of the other really interesting things that we see, when you've done all the snazzy filters at the top, they're very likely to grow and this, that, and the other, then you look at turnover, you look at assets, they all show degrading pictures, even when you've deliberately tried to choose your winners. We had the most hilarious demo with somebody from the corporation who will remain nameless, and he couldn't believe the graphs on assets, because he was like, this is our main problem, is whether these fintechs join our stock exchange or go to Frankfurt and New York, because they are the kind of creme de la creme. And we were literally like, they have no money, they have no money, they are leveraged. And we all know this instinctively, particularly when you're around startups and all the rest of it. There is a sort of slight fake it till we make it, but not understanding the dynamic of a fast growing business that isn't funding it through turnover and the gap. And as we know, access to finance schemes needs to be there.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a perfect market to target this stuff, I think. There's far too many of those schemes that have kind of really struggled to find the right firms and get in there at the right time. So the right finance at the right time is key for it. And I think what's also really interesting is where having that data is, you can see where someone's turned around and said, I haven't got funded. Well, it's pretty obvious why they got funded, as you say. But then there's a whole lot of other routes to get that funding.
Exactly.
And I think being able to target those firms with that alternative finance mechanism, which is a rich source, there's a lot of backing for it, but just to be more targeted on that, I think the referral networks are great. It's really important to have that, and nobody can ever take away from that. That's important. But if you can use data in there and say, here is your list of firms, you know, the chances are these are getting turned down from the bank, because it's pretty obvious why they're getting turned down, but they're right for these other funds. I think that gets really, really interesting to do that, and often with a bit of wraparound support as well.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just about don't go for that fund, go for this fund. It's about, well, let's understand what these other people are actually looking for, and with a bit of a tweak to your business plan, with a bit more clearer articulation of people in the business, with a clearer articulation of the market you're going after, and really getting that there. actually you're going to get that funding, and actually, if you get that funding, you're more likely to get it back from the original source as well in some way, and put that.
And co-financing models,
finance.
absolutely.
So I think there's so much support that can be there. And I think the art is about unlocking the potential of those businesses and unleashing it. And yeah, so really kind of you get that story of that headline or whatever, unleash. It doesn't need unleash you, but it's about information, putting those bits together that can really unleash. And it doesn't always necessarily mean a fintech, of course. Many fintechs can be unleashed, but there's a whole load of other. Yeah, but there are a whole load of other really interesting firms. And look what I've seen, in just distribution, in a whole range of other sectors that we've seen, manufacturing, etc., that have got real growth potential and are growing. And our data's solid, and look at the success rates that we've had with it. Yeah.
One of my other massive passions is that the public sector itself can be the lender of first resort in the case of SMEs that need to get over a hump, that have got a strong propensity for growth. So that involves a bit of a change. The one thing that has been really interesting, and I know that government announcements at this point in a parliament and in a government's life are to be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt, because they're not the time to legislate, let alone to deliver. But the Chancellor's Mansion House speech about the use of pension funds.
That's a risk, though, isn't it? People stopping at the minute because they're waiting for whatever comes next, and you can't. You've got to get going.
Crack on.
Yeah.
But the Mansion House speech being devoted to unlocking pension funds, and we've seen a lot of pension fund reform or mooted pension fund reform. I've always been a fan of the Manchester Mortgage pilot, which was small. Obviously, a pension fund has to be incredibly careful about having the money there for its pensioners, and that's its reason for being. But we see a lot of international pension funds investing in infrastructure in this country. Both Liverpool and Manchester airports at times have been owned by public sector pension funds from other places. And the Manchester Mortgage was great, because it was literally a very, very key understanding. 100 affordable houses sold into the market, reinvest that money into the pension fund. But it really was difficult to get done at the time, 2005-06. I'm hoping that the consequences of the Mansion House speech might be that we can have a grown-up conversation about sources of capital,
absolutely,
which are in the system. They always say the GM pension fund is the biggest in Europe. Well, let's make some of that money work. And again, I'm not wanting to imperil anybody's future. I mean, that would be awful. However, there are ways that money can make money, and with models like this, you're narrowing your.
Well, you're reducing the risk, aren't you? But you're reducing the risk, and then you start to unlock those other bits of capital, put all that together. And what's really interesting is having that full financial ladder. So it's great to have those things unlocked up here, but you've got to have that pipeline coming through, and that comes right through from your early angel investment all the way through. And what we're able to do is at each step of the journey, look at where there's gaps, look at where there's challenges, and try and just unpick them. And through some fantastic work we've done with GC Angels, been able to go in and have a co-angel pot with us acting sometimes as a lead investor, but then bringing in a whole load of other people around us, because they've got the confidence, we've done that due diligence, we've slightly reduced the risk, we've been in there, and that's given the firm a huge amount of weight to bring other people on board with that investment. And once you start that, then you've got that ladder getting through that can be growth businesses, and then eventually, of course, you're unlocking pension funds and have that full scale growth further down the line. But you've got to have that full system in place, and all bits of the system knowing about what's going on for the bits. And I think, this is just a start in terms of what we're doing with Growthfly. I'm really intrigued to put more and more data layers upon it, looking at data flows in terms of deal flows and what's happened with that, looking at some innovation data. That's really tough, isn't it? But we've got to get it right. But as long as we keep the robustness of what we've got, and I think this is solid. I think everybody has been through and seen the detail of it, and we've put it in front of some pretty testing audiences, haven't we?
Yes.
But it's in the robust. We've got to keep that. But adding more data sets on it, I think it's just going to be a fascinating journey. And the clients that we've already got on board are going through that, and it's really entertaining, isn't it? To see how they're using it, we're using it, and some of the conversations we're having is things you could only dream of that.
And I think that's the main point, is all the things that have been the most interesting about Growthflag were not the things that we thought we were
No,
setting out to do.
no.
We were doing quite a prosaic piece around what are the 1,000 or 2,500 highest growing businesses in GM to go into a process that you were going to target those businesses better. That was the extent of our ambition. Obviously, because we had people like Rupert involved, the methodology became increasingly kind of robust. The robustness of it was definitely improved by working through those use cases. But yeah, the use cases of the future, we don't even know which bit of the data people that have it are going to zero in on.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't mentioned that every demo we do, we show the gender balance of the directors and persons of significant control, and are always really cheered to see more than a third.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
What have been the success rates when predicting growth?
So a technical question, excellent, just when my head is roaming around thinking about commodity prices. Our brilliant data scientists, we basically spent the sort of latter half of the pandemic getting this right, settling the score, and that's a technical term, and optimizing it. And so you're always seeking for an 80-20 split. So you don't want any of your sections to have, so you have a growth segment and a non-growth segment. The growth segment needs to have 80% of the characteristics, and the other 20% can be in other sectors, but you don't want it to be below that. And when Bethany did that optimization, it is 93%. So don't immediately start tweeting me, and we should publish scientific papers because we've.
Are we still allowed to tweet? Isn't that over?
Yes, don't X me, threads me. Sounds awful. The point is that we haven't put it into the literature, we haven't written it up, but our repeat rates are in the 90s in terms of what we predict.
Which is incredible. That's why we're so proud of it, and that's why we've got it out there, and that's why we're building a whole raft of kind of strategic developments on it, analytics on it, and getting it out there and starting those services.
And it's part and
it can only get better with it as we get better data and get more nuance to it.
Absolutely, because as everybody knows, there's 1.4 million companies in the database because they meet the logic gates to get in. Interestingly enough, from talking to the professor yesterday, he views the kind of active economy as about 1.8, which is it's always very interesting to sort of even just the raw numbers of what businesses are where can become really interesting. But yes, we are proud of our 93% success rate in predicting companies that will go on to grow at 20%.
Yeah, tremendous.
What are the uses and limitations of economic data?
Wow. Well, so the point of collecting economic data is in order to be able to govern a population, right? The word statistics comes from the state. So counting things up and putting them in a basket and being like, this is our country, that is the roots of the discipline, right? So you understand it so you can govern it. That is the sort of old school version of the relationship. What you're talking about is political economy. That's political economy. There are other versions, of course, of political economy which are clearer, and that I refer the webinar to Vladimir Lenin, whose version of political economy is 2 words: who/whom, which I think is a very neat way of summing up everything that we've been talking about. Who's got what? I would also just, as a space nerd, as a spatial analyst, economist, whatever, who, whom, and where. So I think who, whom, and where is the answer in terms of the root. The data gives you what you're able to know and therefore to govern. So that's the kind of.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is just haven't had the right data in the sector, and so there's been a lack of faith in that data, so we haven't built systems around it. As soon as you've got that new data, it means you've got to have a new system to build around to really explore. We've got it now, and then it's about building around that. And so I think, how's it being used today? Partially, and not all that well, generally, economic data, and generally historic, hard to see it, hard to understand it. when you get it in a really easy to use format, really accessible, and it's giving you that data there, that leads to some pretty big ramifications about what structures you put around that intelligence and how you explore it. And starting with the data is the key. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time. It's quite challenging though, isn't it? Because we're coming forward with something that means people have got to do something different. But nevertheless, I think, you know, how it's been used to date, not as well as it should have been. How is it going to be used going forward? It's going to be incredibly well used because we've got the tools to do it now.